I'm Daniel. I am a recovering administrator. I was a high school, well, I'll back up. I've taught 6th grade through 12th grade and high school administrator, middle school administrator. And right now what I do is I develop and run therapeutic schools in Los Angeles and Orange County for students at the highest level of care who might have a, hospitalization, need to be stabilized, and we're a WASC accredited school. So I'm still actively school administrator, but in a therapeutic space. So it's a little bit different. So I spent 12 and a half years in a very high performing public school, 7 through 12. And then since then I've been working in Los Angeles and Orange County with more boutique, high level of care educators. Schools. I have 3 kids of my own. I have a 6th grader, I have a 3rd grader, and I have a pre-K. I used to come up here all the time because I coached varsity tennis. So we had some big matches up here because I coached at Corona Del Mar High School, which has a good tennis team. And what else about me is important to know? I'm an author. I've written a book called The Assertive Parent, which came out in 2018. I wrote a book called Recover EDU, which is about mental health in schools. And I have a new book coming out called Sobertunity, which is about the opioid substance abuse crisis, and that will come out next January. So I've written for the Huffington Post, the LA Times, blah, blah, blah. All that to say, at my heart, a restorative approach and a balanced, pragmatic approach is how I really attacked being an administrator, being a teacher, looking at creating autonomy, but also having accountability, right? So we live in not in this society, but in a greater education society, we live in a space that is high accountability. We want you to get good grades. We want you to be on time. We want you to do well in school. We want you to do this, that. Low support, right? Low support meaning what's below the surface in terms of mental health, physical health, learning needs. As a system, no one here is accused of that. This is gonna work. So the goals tonight are just to look at these 4 tangents. And if you want, I can email you the slides, or you can take pictures of the slides, whatever you want to do. Transparency, simplicity, approachability, and consistency with kids. I consider myself to be, and this is not a name I gave myself, but they do call me the teen whisperer, because I'm able to go into really critical situations with 12 to 18 and reach them in a way that other people can't, with a mix of drawing out autonomy, right? But also holding them accountable. And the way that we do that, the way that I do that, is by always being very transparent with my communication, keeping it really simple. My process is really simple, like in the home, very simple. At school, very simple. So that it's so simple, it almost feels counterintuitive, like this is too easy, right? But by being so simple, I'll actually do it. Has anyone ever tried to do 75 hard? Bless you. 75 hard it's obviously very challenging, right? And that's an example of something that I can't sustain. 75 hard is you work out twice a day, you read 10 pages a day, you drink a gallon of water a day. It's a lot of different things. Some of us like to go out like 75 hard with our parenting, right? And then you get into October, November, and just like, I'm exhausted. I can't keep this up, right? This is too much. I have too many systems in place. John Wooden always said, be careful how many rules you make, because you have to enforce them, right? If your handbook or your home rule book looks like a huge set of IKEA instructions, we have a problem. Typically, social, academic, substances and future plans is where most parents focus their energy. I know I do on those. Because I worked at such a high performing school for so long, and because I work in a school now that is the product of students who have mostly come out of really high pressure academic situations, substances and future plans, they really play into this whole boundaries, not bubble wrap. And the theme of that is, if I have a hard-boiled egg and I have a raw egg and I had them each in my hand and I were to drop them, they would both crack, but one would survive, right? One would still be malleable. You could probably rescue it. They could make a little deviled egg or something. The other one you'd have to clean up, right? And so oftentimes I call it bubble wrap because we inoculate, we protect our kids so much so that we actually are doing them a counter service. A large part of my job in the private sector is what I call return to sender, which is college freshmen coming back at an alarming rate, higher rates than we've ever seen before, ever. And the incongruity of gender. So 60% of all college students right now are female, 40% are male. So your highest subsection and the reason that those stats exist is because so many male students are coming home after one semester, one quarter, semester and a half at alarming rates, really high rates. Yeah, they come, mental health crises, they don't know how to function without their parents, they haven't faced adversity, they haven't been told no, or they've been locked up in the tower. And so they have a 4.6 GPA and they get to college and they go absolutely crazy because they've never been let out of the house, right? Overcorrection. And this is not a talk to encourage you to let your kids use substances. It's just about balance. And I live in that middle space, right? Of high performing children, loving families, they do all the right things, yet they still end up over here. So there's just a few strategies that we can work on to decrease the odds of ending up where you don't want to end up. So again, this isn't about not being accountable. I'm not saying let your kids do all the drugs and who cares if they do their homework. It's about that magic sweet spot between holding your child accountable, but providing them the support to be held accountable, right? Giving them a corrective experience. In the education sphere, we call that restorative justice, restorative practices. When I was a principal down in Orange County, when students were caught with drugs or alcohol or cyberbullying, instead of suspending, we provided them with 8 sessions of therapy. And in 6 years that we did that, 89% of those students never had one more disciplinary infraction in a 712 school. Not one. 89%. Because behaviors are manifestations of feelings, right? And so the accountability, they still had to go do something that they didn't want to do, which is go talk to a therapist 8 weeks in a row. Oh, can you imagine? But we were at the same time holding them accountable, but we were providing them with support to understand why they were doing what they were doing. The best time to see a therapist is when nothing is wrong. I think we should see the therapist like we see the dentist at least twice a year. Right? Make it so normal. All of my kids, well, my 2 oldest who are old enough to go to therapy every other week. Simply for the fact that I want to make it normal, like going to the dentist. Because too often we wait until it's too late and then it looks like a punitive measure, right? Like, oh, I caught you smoking weed. You got to go to therapy and figure out why. And then they've cemented their whole relationship with mental health services is punitive, thereby avoiding it, right? Any questions so far? You can ask questions at any time. What I want to look at is creating, one strategy is to create some if-then statements. And remember in the beginning, I said transparency. So boundaries versus bubble wrap. A boundary would be, you can go to the dance tonight, like you can go out on Friday night, but you will be drug tested upon re-entry to the home, right? Versus bubble wrap, you can't go. You can't go. Or boundaries like, I don't care if you party, you can party as much as you want as long as you have a 4.0. As long as your grades are good, right? There's different, versus a boundary would be like, you need to study X amount of time per day. And you need to email your teachers proactively and give them tangible markers or things that achievables that are process driven, not product driven. Does that make sense? The process. So coming up with some if-then statements across the spectrum of your parenting. School is only one fraction of the whole child. Unfortunately, it dominates about 89, 95% of the conversations you have with kids. How was your day today? How was school? It's a natural thing that we ask because we don't know what else to say. When my wife and I go on vacation or we go out to dinner, we went out on Sunday night, we went out to dinner. We like to do like early bird special. The rules are that we can't talk about work and we can't talk about our kids. Try that. We're just like, what do you say? Like literally, like, what do you say, right? So one practice I call the 45-minute rule. At any age, at any stage, I don't ask my kids about their day, their school day, for 45 minutes when I see them. Because I don't know about you, but when you get home from work, Mike comes in and his kid's like, Dad, how's work? And just starts asking him, did you send out that email? Did you get that email done? Who's running your Twitter account? Like, like we all need that time to decompress. We want it as adults, but we don't give it. The gift of the 45-minute rule is that they become trained, anticipatory, that they will not be in a defensive posture when they get in your car. They will not go straight to their room when they get home. As much, I mean, some kids will, right? Just inherently, they don't like their parents or they don't want to be around them. It's part of the process, but far less so if they feel like every time that they're with you, they're, having to be conjuring up some sort of reason or excuse. So if then, like, I won't talk to you, I'm not going to micromanage your school, but if this happens, then this is how we're going to deal with it, right? And that could be across any sort of spectrum. So our kids are really defined with who they are and what they experience, also known as nature versus nurture, right? We heard nature, nurture, but the easiest way to think about that is who they are just in their DNA, and then what happens to them. Yeah.
So processing the 45-minute thing.
Yeah.
What do you talk to them about in that 45 minutes?
You name it. You figure it out, right? That's the whole thing, is that we have to learn to see our kids as whole people. We are, and when I say we, because we're guilty of this too, me and my wife, right? Of producing, of manufacturing, and we're going to get to this because there's a difference between loving a child and curating a child. Loving a child and curating a child. And I see it with the return to sender. You have a bunch of high-performing, very self-sufficient because they've been propped up through school, and then they get to college and they're like they don't know what to do. They get a little weed, a little wine, a little stress, and they're like, I don't know, right? Anything other than grades or metrics that would assign their value through the lens of school. Just for 45 minutes.
Do they know? Do you tell them?
No. This is like some Jedi. This is some Jedi stuff, right? Little mind trick. Yeah.
Question, the product versus process.
Yes.
We have a senior in high school and eighth grader.
Great.
So we've kind of been through the first round.
Right.
We know some of the mistakes we made, but for the senior,
Right.
we know that effort is more important to some degree than the A's, right?
Correct.
We want to see her working hard, but what happens when we focus on the process is it's a lot of micromanagement, a lot of gray area. How do you kind of navigate giving them the accountability,
right,
the responsibility to kind of navigate the process? But when you see those great products start to go down, how do you jump in and get back in the process and not the product?
I like this question. We're going to get to this because this has to do with natural consequences, right? And where do you draw the line between what's a natural consequence and what's rescuing, right? Because there is a fine balance. Like, you don't want them to fall off the ledge. And for example, for seniors, a D could rescind admission, right? And so that's real dangerous. So you see them trending that way, that's usually a sign that something else is going on. Seniors around this time of year start to panic. They don't want to leave home. They don't want to leave their friends. It's a little bit of imposter syndrome, self-sabotage. Most of the time, talking to a clinician, a therapist, a counselor fixes that. And you actually don't need to get involved in the micromanagerial because it has nothing to do with that, right? It's the only way that they can express. When kids feel like they have no control, they'll control the narrative of school because it gets your attention. right? But at the same time, you don't want to send a kid to college that they don't belong at if it's not innate in their ability, because they will not survive in that environment. So there's over 4,600 colleges in North America. But I bet you, I mean, in Newport Mesa, I know that about 90% of the students in Newport Mesa School District is very similar to this demographically, socioeconomically. They applied to the same 22 high schools or colleges. SMU, TCU, your Ivies, your UCs, right? Like USC, like Oregon, maybe, you know, there's like 22 schools get 90% of the applications, because that's just the way that we've like programmed ourselves, right? So part of that is letting them fail. Jessica Lahey writes a great book called The Gift of Failure. If you've ever read that book, it's about letting your children fail and how to do that appropriately. It's applicable at any age and stage, unless you want to parent until they're like 30 and you want them living in that guest room, you know, then we have to teach them to fail, and allow them to fail. So this is like the support versus curator, right? How do you support your daughter or your child who is struggling versus manufacture results that aren't authentic? My middle child last year was a first grader, pandemic, you know, so that last year was her first year back in school. She was below grade level at math, at reading, highly anxious. She tried to come home the first like 30 days of school. Every single day she would call them, go to the nurse and try to come home. And same household as our other kids, and our kids loved school. She didn't want to go. She was like throwing things at me, like literally down the stairs, like turning into this person that I did not recognize. And we put her in art therapy every other week. That's the only variable that we changed. And at the end of first grade, she was above grade level in all subjects, right? Because I could have gotten really militant. I could have really like woken her up early, but I know enough to know enough based on the work I do that most behaviors are just manifestations of unmet emotional needs. I was speaking at a really fancy prep school in LA last week, and one of the parents was kind of pushing back, saying, "What by doing that, you're going to decrease resiliency." No, what you're going to do is you're going to increase self-efficacy. They're going to actually understand how to identify and name their emotion. The rule in my house is you can yell at me as long as you're yelling your actual emotion. I'm so frustrated with you. I'm so angry with you. I'm so disappointed in you, right? I'm teaching them to say those things, even if sometimes they yell, whatever. Not everyone needs to yell, but I grew up in a household where I couldn't say anything. My dad was an old school high school principal, you know, like college football player. Like you didn't say anything to my dad. So I kept everything here, which resulted in horrible mental health in college, which I ended up becoming a raging alcoholic. I'm 8 years sober now, right? So like I did all of these things because I didn't know how to process. I just was a people pleaser. Got to keep my parents happy. Got to keep my 4.0, play varsity tennis, varsity football, and we're good, right? So the best defense is a good offense. It's this tug of war between having proactive interventions and reactive interventions. And unfortunately, just the way the world works and we're all busy, we're really good at this one over here, the reactive, right? They get their grade drops below a certain point, we get them a tutor. They do this, we get them that. They do this, we get them that. So we're playing defense all the time versus stopping and flipping the narrative and putting some proactive systems in place, which would be an example of like office hours, or you're a senior, so you're on your own, if then statement, that if your grades get below C's, then you can't drive, unfortunately, because if you're not old enough to take care of your grades, you're probably not old enough to drive. Something like that, like some power move, right? But don't focus on the grade as much as the process, like office hours, 45 minutes a day, 1 hour a day, whatever it is. Another proactive intervention would be from a young age, My daughter, I have a sixth grader, high anxiety, high performing. She's in the GATE program, which I'm just like, can I get her out of that? She puts so much pressure on herself that when she melts down, I make her email her teacher. You have to deal with this, right? Because she part of it's some attention seeking behavior. Part of it's just natural anxiety. If it's that important to you that you're literally rolling around on the floor, like you need to get up, collect yourself, and sit down and send an email and express your feelings. And they never want to, and the teacher is always super graceful, and it always works itself out. But a lot of my friends who have kids similar age, they will just hop on and they'll jump right in the email, right on Class Dojo. They just go right in. And the kid actually has no idea there's any communication going on behind, right? And so they don't have any sort of agency in the change or agency in the conversation. And if you're playing the long-term game here, which is college is 4 years, but it's, if you made a timeline, our kids are going to live to be like annoyingly long, like well over 100, right? And you think about 4 years of high school and 4 years of college, it's such a small amount of time. I really want to zoom out and focus on skill building that's transferable skills beyond the classroom into the workplace, right? And then formal and informal support. I'm a huge fan of mentorship. If and how and when and where that works. Not every child is an athlete. So I just use my own children because they're easier examples. Child one, big athlete. Double black belt, taekwondo, golf, tennis, you name it. She just, what's next? Middle child who's 4 years younger, she could, trips over her own shoes or whatever, so it's like, how do I put her in a position to have a positive experience with another adult that's not a parent, that's not just therapy, that's going to teach her some communication skills so she takes art lessons, right? Or we have a mentor. We basically made our own like big brother, big sister with a woman that we know that she spends time with. And then formal support would be like, the therapy, the tutor. Tutors are really, and if any tutors are watching this, I apologize. They're huge economic, like if you invested that money differently, let me just put it that way. If you invested the money differently, the return on that investment would yield a much greater return on investment than the tutor. Because what the tutor is like, I only do my homework with the tutor. How come you haven't done your homework? Well, I haven't had my tutor yet. Versus doing all of your homework, and if you still have questions and you've itemized those questions, I'll get you a tutoring session. Rather than you have tutor all these days a week to keep your grades artificially high so that you can get into this one of the 20 schools that we all apply to, so that you can come home after one semester. So that then you can go back to SMC, we'll try to get you off the weed, get a job, and you're going to live with me till you're 26. Now, I'm not saying kids don't need tutors, right? I was horrible at math. I took it twice in college. So I needed help with math. Some of us have roadblocks to learning that are real. But I think, if you think about parenting as like Amazon, add to cart, like how much are we adding to the cart that we need to add to the cart when we could ball on the budget, tone it down a little bit. So examples of academic boundaries versus bubble wrap, office hours. I call them office hours, like when I make you got to study in the living room, at the kitchen table, be proximal to them, but don't hover. So like the kids studying in their bedroom is the kiss of death. Like, forget it. If you want them to study in their bedroom, just don't have them study. Just be like, just take the night off. I'm going to go to my room. No, I need my phone for this assignment because, no, they don't. They don't need any of that. They don't need their phone. And also they don't need to be in the room. Room is for sleeping. Okay. And for like when you're done with, and it's also an incentive because you have this like healthy paranoia, a little bit of healthy discomfort. Do they want to be at the kitchen table? No. Will they be more efficient? Yes. Now they're going to throw everything at you. They'll be like, I can't focus down here because, right? But they can focus with like YouTube and like everything else. Like you can focus on things that you want to focus on, but you have to retrain the brain. So clear expectations, communication, right? Communication. So I really, if you have an ability to check your child's grades on a daily basis, could you raise your hand? I would really encourage you to not look at that more than once a week. And I would put it honestly, like what dopamine hit do you need? Like get an Instagram, like do something for you, because that is just it's not practical. So many kids getting text messages at school from their parents. Why do you have a C- in science? Why are you missing this? Why are you missing that? Meanwhile, there's no phones at the classroom, but you're all texting them like, what, you know? And so part of the process I would say is of that accountability and autonomy, you can be like, you know what, we're gonna have an academic meeting every Wednesday. As a family, we're gonna sit down and go over your stuff. You tell me what you have. We can go over your stuff once a week, and that's gonna determine X, Y, and Z. And you always do it in midweek. Don't do it on a Friday. Don't do it on a Monday. Because you do it on a Monday, they're like, well, I don't have anything yet, right? And you do it on Friday, the week's over. So Wednesday, right in the middle of the week, like a 30-minute, 15-minute talk about your grades. How's it going? You can talk about product, right? You can talk about those things. You can set your expectations. But if you are just constantly, I call it drone parenting, like you're just like over them, they can't hear you, but you're just like, you ever realize that drone's over you and you're just like, what? You can kind of hear it, but you don't know. Drone parenting, just always like helicopter parenting is a term that we all have probably heard, but that's like really loud and aggressive. Drone is like more stealth. Like you think you're not a helicopter parent because you're like more quiet, but you swoop in just as much, right? So reasonable courses. This is really important. I believe in a 3-2 split. A 3-2 split, if I'm a high school student or a middle school student and I can take 5 academic classes, I'm just going to say, because PE are elective, but my 5 academics like that, my math, science, history, blah, blah, blah. 3 challenging, that would be honors or AP. 2 normal. Or reverse it. If the kid is struggling in the opposite direction, 3 normal, 2 what I would call push class. Push. Colleges like well-rounded student bodies, but they don't like well-rounded students. Did you hear me?
No.
Colleges like well-rounded student bodies, but they don't like well-rounded students. If I do everything, I do nothing. If my resume is 19 pages long and I've done 20 things for 1 hour, I did this once and this once and that once and this once and this one. You get lost in the like, okay, this candidate has been master manipulated and they're not going to be able to last. Versus you know exactly who you are, like you're a math, science, STEM, STEAM, whatever stream, however you want to call it now, and you stand in that and you're good at that and you allow yourself to take a course or 2 that's easy. It creates balance. And it also eliminates plausible deniability from your children because they're not maxed out. When they have so much to do in so little time, is it their fault if they can't get it all done? Is it their fault that they're cheating, right? Is it their fault that my alarm went off? Sorry. I don't even know how to why. So do you understand that natural? An even split. They don't need to take everything. A lot of kids, their parents, when I was at high school, their parents would fill out their course requests. Kids didn't even know what they were taking. Just going to college. And then natural consequences, which is, it's good to let them have natural consequences from a different adult, from a third-party adult that's not you. That could be a teacher or a coach or a boss. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. Examples of boundary drug testing, effort standards, right? Like you have to have a certain effort threshold, but we're not going to talk about actual grades. Because the 4.0 mask, which is a part of my later series in this year, we'll talk about that, but kids wear that and it's easy. It's so easy to get a 4.0 right now if you game the system with weighting, because they'll just take their easy grit classes in AP level to nullify. Location services as an example of a boundary, like you can go out, but I need to know where you are. Versus you can't go out and I don't trust you. You can earn my trust by keeping your location services on and be willing to take a drug test when you get home. And I love the people that my kids would never smoke weed. Like weed is part of the starter pack now for adolescents. I mean, we're seeing at the company school I work for as young as 11 in active addiction. Well-educated, loving, well-intended families has nothing to do with your parenting. It's just proximal, right? Access, you can get it on Snapchat, you can get it on Craigslist, you can get it anywhere. And they can deliver it like weed maps. They'll just deliver it to you right here in the school parking lot. Bad. Open communication, leaning in, and limits on tech. Leaning in meaning like having those tough conversations. Having them like what I'm allowed to, my kids can they can yell at me, told you that, if they're yelling at me about what they're actually feeling. Can they call me names and swear at me? No, but they can raise their voice if they are feeling a really certain way, because I want them, because I have to lean into how they feel because I'm part of the ecosystem. And if I don't validate how they're feeling, even if I don't agree with it, they'll never talk to me again. And open communication is really important the older they get. Limits on tech. My favorite thing to do if you're at a high school or any age, if they have an iPhone, is that you charge it in your room. And at some point, the first thing they're going to say is, "Where's my alarm clock?" Like, it's my alarm. Okay. When have you ever gotten up on your own? First, and two, let's get you an old-fashioned alarm clock. Because they charge it, gives you one last time to say goodnight, check in with them, right? Love you, good night. And two, it just allows them to sleep. Because even I have to charge my phone on the opposite side of my bedroom because I will look at it. I will look at it. So that's an example of boundaries. Any questions? Am I making sense on sort of like what a boundary looks like? They're going to be different for every family.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So back to drug testing, if you haven't seen your kids exhibit any drug use, like do you start it once you notice them?
No, so that would be reactive. So I would just initiate it like anything else, right? Like you take driving tests to drive and take a drug test to be out and about. It's part of earned autonomy, right? And it's not assuming that they're doing drugs. It's just creating healthy paranoia not to do drugs. Because if you have a correct if-then statement, if I catch you smoking, we're like, kids are going to experiment with drugs. They just are. In LA County specifically, I'm literally like school to school to school to school to school talking about drugs right now. Because 3 out of 4 pressed pills, any kind of pill on the street right now in LA County has fentanyl in it. So we're seeing high performers, like kids that are getting think they're getting Adderall because they're on a 35 on the ACT, who are passing away accidental overdose, right? So the drug testing isn't just for kids are using it for different ways, right? You know, they're not always just using it to escape, they're using it to perform. Specifically with Xanax to calm themselves or Adderall to amp themselves up. So, but it's a kind of, you can thread the needle while you're doing it. And then you don't come from a place of hostility and you just integrate it into, hey, as you're getting older and you want these other responsibilities, we have to have some safeguards that we're going to put into place and we can kind of phase out, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Bubble wrap enabling, they're going to drink anyway, so I'd rather them do it at my house. That's my favorite, which I get, but then all of a sudden you have all these kids over every weekend and they just love your child, but they actually don't. They just love the access to the lack of supervision. Finishing assignments, that's a good one. my daughter wanted me to, my wife got, she helped my daughter finish an assignment. And they were up late and my daughter's like, can you please help me? Meanwhile, I know her time management's just been crap, right? So I'm like, no, I'm not gonna help you. You got yourself into this, you can get yourself out of this, or you can turn in late. Not gonna finish it for you. My wife, on the other hand, had a different experience where her parents were never around. So she's like struggling with the opposite. Like, I want to be there for my children because my parents will not. Does that make sense? So I just let them do their thing. She has promised to never do another assignment because they were up to like 2 a.m. Communication for your student in lieu of, right? I see parents writing emails from their students' accounts. I see parents writing their kids' essays. It's bad. And I see unreasonable courses because you are in the mentality and you got to keep up, and that somehow your kid's academic performance or where they go to college has a determining factor on your value as a parent. If your child is happy and healthy and has passion, right, then you've done a good job. If they feel safe to communicate with you, that you've done a good job. Whether or not they get into USC, which now has like about a 10% acceptance rate, which is about on par with a medical school. I'd just like to point that out. I got into a pretty heated debate with the dad because he wanted his son to apply to USC. I'm like, he's not going to get into USC. I'm just going to call it like it is. He's not a, all-star athlete. He's just who he is. And the dad's like, I got into USC and I had bad grades. Oh, I'm a little passive aggressive sometimes. So I looked it up. When he went to USC, the acceptance rate was like 78%. So I just printed the little spreadsheet for him. I'm like, well, this is why you got it, buddy. So he didn't apply, right? So sometimes they're over tutored and then preventing natural consequences. So we want them to struggle, have some natural consequences. A lot of parents will call their kids in sick. I've had, because they don't want to take a test, they forgot to turn in an essay, and you're torn. I get it. You want to save them, you want to rescue them, you love them. But if you want them to actually play the long game, they need to go to school without the essay. They got to go take the test. Cold, yeah.
So you're talking a lot about academic things, but what if the kids and this communicating for themselves, what if the kids are struggling with social stuff or bullying or friendships, and they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk to anyone about it because they're like, that's not a problem, I'm fine, but it's not. How do you, I can easily get them to email the teacher about a problem or something like that, but when it's social, I struggle with that.
Yeah, and I think that's a healthy boundary. I think it's a healthy boundary. I think a trap that a lot of older parents can fall into is what I would call friengineering, right? Where you're getting into the weeds with relationships, and that's honestly where having a third-party therapist or counselor that they already have a relationship with, kids will always tell you, you can send me, but I'm not going to say anything. You're just wasting your money, right? They always talk. They always talk because adolescent therapists are so good at, you get someone to share with you by having a common enemy. And guess who that is at first? Parents, right? Always. Slam dunk. Let's talk some smack about your parents and then we'll get to what's real and what's not real, right? So third party, but also establishing that is your alarm going off too? We both get up at the same time. Establishing, like when I said the 45-minute rule, we're like, how was your day? Some silence, some space for them to decompress, you will start to understand that it will start to come more to you, right? But it's completely normal for preteens and teens to not want to communicate with their parents, which is why a therapist or a counselor, school psychologist, anyone, mentor, right? Their favorite aunt or uncle, someone that you trust.
But specifically, you said you know, like sometimes we talk to a counselor and the kids don't know. Like
Right.
if it's a school counselor,
Right.
is that fair? Like you talk to them and they go seek out your kid and try to, or do you want, I mean, do you think that we should be saying, hey, there's a problem? I'm gonna go talk to the counselors and they're to be aware, like that.
I mean, I would, as much as you can, you encourage them to do it. So like, for example, if I had a student disclose to me something that I knew was critical that their parents needed to know, I would say as a teacher or administrator, look, I'm gonna give you 24 hours to figure out how you can talk to that. You can deliver that information to your parents. And I would help them problem solve about how to do that. But if you haven't, then I'm gonna have to help you, right? So it could be going with them. And now school is really hard, right? Because you're like, no, I don't want them to get in trouble and I don't want, so that's where really helping them get coping skills to deal with people who will be like that person for the rest of their life. A lot of us as parents make it about that one scenario. We get caught on that one scenario. But really, if you pivot and you put them in a position where they're just building coping skills, strength, autonomy, confidence, that person will always exist. They'll just be in your office later and then work for you or you'll work for them. Does that make sense? So, and we can talk more about that offline if you have specific questions. I'd love to help. I don't even know what time it is because I want to make sure I get through this. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I was just gonna add, I've had to deal with the same thing before with my kiddos. And one of the things that I always try to, which I feel like is really helpful, is I ask them what they should do about it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And the answer can't be, I don't know.
Well, my answer is like, I'm fine. I'm
Right.
fine.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
always the answer I get.
And so what are the metrics that you know that they're not fine? How do you know that they're not fine? Is it just your mom tuition?
It's just, you know, being really tired or, you know, and it's not all the time where I think, okay, it's like severe depression or anything like that. It's just like it's cyclical and some of it might just be teen stuff.
Correct.
but, You know, it's,
Yeah. So I would say just connecting them with a third party to get them in the habit of talking about it where it feels low stakes, right? Because, but if you go back to the way back, second slide was transparency. And a lot of times people don't give information. Like if somebody calls me and even like when the census comes to my door, I'm like, what are you doing? Or if I'm at the doctor and they want my social security number, I'm not giving you that because I don't know what you're going to do with the information.
Right.
So if you come to me and you've made a bad choice, if you come to me and you've tried drugs and you want to talk about like that experience, then you're not going to get in trouble and we can talk about it, right? But if you do it again, it's a different conversation. So you have to establish, a lot of times kids don't tell their parents things because they have no idea how you're going to react, right? What if they made a bad choice, which got them into this situation in the first place? They don't want to tell on themselves. Fear of punishment is a big communication stopper.
I think one thing I struggle with, we bring up a case, I'll say else, is with our older, we have two opposite kids, kind of hard to like have a formula there, but our older one, we never really got into like the drug testing conversation because she would always say, well, look, she's always been a rule follower.
Right.
And therefore, if you're going to test me and you don't trust me, we're trying to develop this with mutual trust.
Right.
No, we got the angles, maybe a little bit there in terms of that conversation, but like, where's the fine line of accountability, which is trust?
Right.
Together and managing what you don't want to have happen.
Think about how you build your credit. Think about a credit score like that. How do you build credit? You build credit by like paying your bills on time, right? Having accounts that are open that you can use, but you don't necessarily. You have metrics, you build credit over time with receipts. And so something like drug testing has nothing to do with, I don't trust you. It's just you can even position as like for my own, for me to be able to sleep at night and like really truly like let you have your teen experience and be out without like micromanaging you. It's so much easier for me just to build trust with you by drug testing, even though I know you're not going to do it. But for me, right? For my fears. And this is why, if you look at the news, X, Y, and Z is happening. It would be silly of me to love you and not drug test you. Right? And that's the proactive versus reactive. And the best day to drug test a kid is the day after you've drug tested a kid. Because I mean, honestly, a lot of kids are like, well, every Wednesday I'm gonna drug test you, and they're like, great. Because they know it only takes 3 days to get out of their system, and they have a whole schedule. Overwrapping would be like reading all of their messages. Getting like super involved. You guys, you cannot unsee what you're gonna see, so please, I'm just warning you. I'm just warning you. I know you want to know, but do you want to know? Right? Hiding negative info. So one of the, because I run a therapeutic high school, or 7 through 12, this is a very common thing from this general vicinity, proximal to West LA. The floor has fallen out from underneath the family system, the child, drugs, alcohol, mental health, disordered eating, whatever it is. They need to like go to treatment, and they want to come to school with us, and the school has no idea anything's been going on. Right? So then it becomes really hard to transfer power, or to like get buy-in from the school to support them staying as a student here, but like maybe doing it at a treatment center for 90 days to get well, because families inherently hide negative information because we don't want it to affect their ability to be elected student body president, or get playing time on the basketball team, or a role in the play. Like, we all do it. I'm not saying you need to march around being like, hey, telling everyone everything, but that is a sign of bubble wrap, is when you're hiding negative information. Like, I'm not going to tell your father that you did acid, right? It's like, why don't we got to deal with this as like a whole family? Or like for me, when my daughter didn't want to go to school, I had to tell her teacher and call the school psychologist. And even though for a living, I do educational wellness, like therapeutic schools, and my daughter is throwing shoes at me, she will not go. Like, great. I've done amazing. Over involvement, calling them in sick. Social activity absent, like where you never let them out of the tower. You're raising Rapunzel. Right? And then Rapunzel goes to SMU. Forget it. Over involvement, you name it. And then just aiding and enabling. You can apply that to anything. We want them to have some natural consequences, or else you are always going to be the villain and the hero, and you're just going to toggle back and forth, and that's exhausting. Somebody else needs to take the be the villain. Somebody else needs to be the hero once in a while, right? Because your kids will just always position themselves as a victim to be saved, to be rescued. It's hard. It's hard. They're very good at manipulation in a loving way. So thematically, what's uncomfortable now is comfortable later, like letting your kid fail. Like making them go to a therapy appointment, like getting a therapist. It's easy. It's very comfortable to be like, I do trust you. I'm not going to drug test you because I don't want this tension. I don't want this discomfort. I'm not going to take you to a therapist because you've told me that you're not going to talk to them. I'm going to leave you alone because I'm afraid that you're going to be mad at me. It's uncomfortable, right? But if you just get through that discomfort, the yield, the return on that investment in the lifespan of their young adulthood is self-efficacy and problem-solving skills and communication skills that will outlive your footprint as their parent and far surpass any sort of like happy dinners, right? Just because you're not making them lean into their own discomfort. In general, for any sort of parenting moves, academic or not, social or not, substance or not, you say, is this good for their mental health, physical health? Is it sustainable? And is it authentic? They're like, oh, it's prom, enter whatever they want to do because it's prom, or it's my senior year, or whatever the case. Like even my 6th grader now, she's at a K6, so she's like top of the food chain. So she's like, well, I don't need to go because of X, Y, and Z. They play that card early. But when I'm making decisions, even about their academics, is it sustainable for them to take 5 AP classes? Well, probably not, because it's not authentic. It will lead to sleep deprivation, and they're going to be super depressed, anxious, and sleep and mental health are very connected, right? So it's like you're what you think one intention over here is in direct conflict with another result over here. So if you look at it through more of a holistic lens, it'll help you make a more informed decision. Some kids are brilliant and they will take all the classes and they will do all the things and they don't need any, that's just who they are. And some kids won't, and that's just who they are. And 39% of Americans graduate from a four-year college. And I'm not here saying that shouldn't be a goal. I'm just saying there's 4,600 colleges in North America. They're gonna be okay. There's someone for everyone. Yeah.
I got a lot of, it's my last Halloween of my senior.
Oh,
year.
yeah.
That's the last, it's called Halloween.
Yeah. So that's,
So, you know, I can think of a million things to argue for.
do you want it to be your last Halloween ever? Right? There's always going to be bargaining.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of emotional warfare, but with the younger one, right? All we can do is like kind of like learn with the younger one. That's an inherent natural result of having ambiguous expectations and ambiguous sort of like, let's just play it as we play it. Now, I don't think you should have a doctrine rule book that's like, but if it was her last and she's being drug tested, you can't have it both ways, right? Do you want to go? Then here's your test, kind of thing. You know what I mean? So use that as leverage, and also healthy communication. Trust isn't everything, and the frontal lobe doesn't develop until you're 25, and they're actually not making adult decisions, even though they're just little kids with big bodies. And the parts of the brain that can make like academic thinking decisions are not the ones that make their impulsive decision-making decisions. Different. The goal is autonomy versus being anchored. We want them to be autonomous by the time they leave your house, not anchored to your house. Which is why, and even you emotionally, it's okay that you check their grades. It's okay that you have boundaries and expectations and standards, but can you as a parent think about something else also? Do you understand that your child's grades is not a representation of your parenting, and sometimes neither is their mental health? My middle child is raised in the same home as my older and younger who don't have anything. I still suffer from depression and anxiety and addiction, right? I have an older brother and a younger brother. We all grew up in the same house. I won. I won, or I lost, whatever you want to call it. It hit me different, right? So sometimes it just is. And sometimes we want a reason. Like, there's no reason for you to just think of all the things to be happy about. We have this beautiful house and this beautiful life, and I'm telling you right now, as a person who has depression, none of that matters. None of that matters sometimes. And the only way that I get through it is I see my therapist once a week. I take my medication. I lift weights 3 times a week. I walk every night. Like, I have my whole routine just to keep my brain moving. I hate working out. Hate it. Because my parents made me play sports. And I didn't want it. So basically, your child's current state of being, then your approach, however you do it, which is different for everyone, will result in a layered impact. And it's going to be the impact. It's going to be the ratio of how anchored versus autonomous they are. To you, to anyone, to a substance, to validation seeking, people pleasing, thinking that their agency, identity, value is tied to how many friends they have, how many followers they have, what colleges they get into, how many colleges that they apply to. That's the new one. I'm applying to 37 colleges. Well, that sounds like a huge waste of time. Congratulations. We want them to be invested, rested, and vested. Now, invested meaning like they have buy-in to what they're doing in their life. rested, so they're not just exhausted, and vested. You know what I mean by vested? Like stocks, like you vest. If you work for Google for 5 years, you vest, you get vested, meaning there's a return on all of the things that if they're invested and appropriately rested, then they'll come out of it with a vested interest. They will be able to self-suffice. Not always, but marginally so, mostly so. Applied support versus natural struggle. The point of this graphic is that you want it to be congruent. You want the balance between the natural struggle and your applied support to be symmetrical. You don't want their struggle to be less than your support and your support to be far greater than their struggle or far greater than it needs to be, so that they don't have any struggle. That's what we call snowplow parenting. You just move everything out of the way so that they have nothing to trip on, right? And then they get to the end of the hallway where your tractor doesn't fit anymore, and they walk out the door and there's a bunch of stuff on the ground. Blind spots, resumes, optics, they seem fine, they look fine, right? They're doing well in school, they check all the boxes, so they're good. I would say the average student that I have at our West LA campus, which we have about 90 total students, high school, enter our school with over a 4.0. Grades they're just not telling the story. And they're in NCL and varsity this, and they're everything, but they're also suffering because they're doing too much. They're doing too much. Sometimes at their own, a lot of times, again, it's the parents are like, calm down. And they're just like, they just don't know how to cope, right? These are just some, you were looking at, you made a good comment about it's not all academics, right? So we look at the whole child, we want to look at like academics is one part of it. But how do you assess their wellness? You look at their relationships, their health, which could include sleeping and eating and all those things, drug use, substances, and then environmental affect is really important. How they show up in different places matters. Because if they're showing up really positively in certain environments and really negatively in other environments, then you know that it's probably not a clinical issue, it's an environmental issue. But if they're showing up really poorly all over the place, does that make sense? Like they hate going to soccer, they also hate going to school, they also don't hang out with their friends. It's a huge red flag. Other examples of red flags: opting out, isolation, defiance, risky behavior. Opting out would be like quitting something you've always loved, dropping out of your friend group, or being kicked out of your friend group. So bubble wrapped will have a negative layer of impact. And the magic here is just providing them with the voice, teaching them how to use resources and find balance. Yes.
I don't on the floor.
Yes.
Validates what I'm doing. But you focus several times on getting enough sleep, which is making me feel guilty.
Yeah.
Because I have a terrible sleep. Will stay up to like 11, then shower, then started to work and we probably I did things that you know what Wi-Fi is going off at 10, 11.
Yeah, and then
Now
how?
from 4 to 11, then you said you're going to the phone. Just feel there. So what happened for 11 in the homework? So and then you know what happens to Wi-Fi. So I
Yeah.
stopped. I finally heard, I've broken so many times. I just, you know what? I can't even invest in music.
Correct.
And I just stopped.
Right.
His grades are actually not bad, they're good.
Right.
I have terrible study habits, and so,
Does he have ADHD?
so maybe he's a big gamer. You have to go on something with computer or something, you can do a software trade. But he's getting terrible. sleep.
Right.
Like, he doesn't, I told him, well, I don't care how much video games you play. First, so you know how long it'll take you, the video games is really more.
Right.
But, that makes too much sense. So when I pick him up from school and then 15-minute drive to the doctor, everything is fun. It's just not
Right.
enough.
Well, and he's probably staying up all night playing video games. Because
No, I go back to the morning.
is he? Because
He wakes up super early. they did finish.
Right.
So I don't know what to think here to intervene, because it becomes about me to him.
Correct.
I'm just hoping that when something is ordered for him, help me with it.
Well, you could take the video games out of the house, right? I had parents take them to work. I mean,
That would be, I feel like that's not like, that would go for free.
right, so you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to, right? So you can give them one last chance in the if-then scenario. If you continue to do this, and I'm gonna keep a little journal here, we're gonna just observe, then it's gonna go away. Right? If you're not responsible enough to manage your time, then you're not responsible enough to insert anything. But you could also, sometimes that just hearing it from somebody else that's not you is also helpful. And 4 kids, you're doing the best you can. Sounds like you're doing great. I have 3 and I don't know what's happening.
Well, I was okay with letting it go, you know, if he's at the age where if I could have out him, also divorced, and one kid chose to look at dad, because they don't really get moved. That's why I'm over and just take the video games.
Right, so it's more complicated there.
Right, so I'm actually okay with the consequences that he made for himself. He's
Right.
gonna have to learn that these split deprivations that affect him, but you guys are making me feel guilty about.
Well, it's not, I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I just, the connection between mental health disorders and sleep with teenagers is really strong, right? Specifically with the dopamine of addiction, the same hits that you would get from taking a shot of tequila or something you get from video games, right? So gaming addiction is probably the fastest growing addiction right now. And the sleep coupled with that, you just might want to get an outside resource to help him understand that in a way that's not you momsplaining, right? But actually giving them information, because information is power. Yeah. All right. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question that's a little bit off topic?
Yeah, ask me. It's like Reddit. You ask me anything.
Not really, not all of them. I mean, I hear some of the parents on this bill, and my kids are in 7th grade, but I hear